Hi everyone, this is Jonathan Hughes, and what you are about to hear is a repost of a conversation that I had with Kevin Fudge. And this show is all about considering cost in the college decision. And we're putting this out right now because this is a time when seniors are going to be compiling their college list and sending out their applications. And you really can't consider college cost in your decision before you consider it in where you apply. So you're going to enjoy this conversation because, as always, Kevin is engaging and insightful. And without further ado, here's Considering Cost in the College Decision with Kevin Fudge. Kevin Fudge has over 20 years of experience in education and currently operates at the intersection of K-12, higher education, and workforce development. Over his career, he's worked in admissions, college access, and higher education policy. He holds degrees from the University of Virginia and Harvard University and serves on the boards of the Al Ray Scholars Program, Central Scholarship, and Apprentice Learning. But I know him best as a sought-after MIFA presenter for college financing. Kevin, how are you?
I'm well, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. So I know you as just, an authority on student loans and an advocate for affordability and for students. Can you just explain to anybody who's listening what your background is and what your path to your current role has been?
Sure. Thanks. Wow, that's a pretty heavy question. So I'll try to condense it in as little time as possible. So I started out, in education, working towards becoming a teacher with the ultimate goal of being a high school principal. And then I got into college admissions. My role in admissions was doing college access and working with traditionally marginalized populations that might not have had access to college before. So it really opened my eyes to a lot of the groups that were working to make college, equitable access to all. But then as a liaison with financial aid, really kind of saw the complexities of the financial aid application process and how challenging it was, for every family that did all the right things, quote unquote, got good grades, standardized tests, went for an interview, did all these great things, found the right college. Then when it came to find the right financial fit, kind of found some difficulties. And this was across the spectrum. So people that were super highly educated themselves and gone to college themselves had confusion, to people who were, first generation students whose families had never gone to college, and everywhere in between. And so that led me to work at my current organization, which is a national nonprofit that started out focusing heavily on higher education financing and student loans in particular, to now sort of morphed into an organization that's really honed in on the middle school to transition to high school, opening up, career exploration opportunities and work-based learning to youth to get an idea of what they might want to pursue, and tying those careers into educational opportunities after high school. So I've been fortunate to see sort of the landscape from different perspectives.
You mentioned the sort of flourishing of the new career aspect of what's going on. And I feel like that's something that's happening a lot across the spectrum here as a focus, not necessarily on college only, but on college and career. And I'm wondering if you can give me a perspective, and anybody listening a perspective, on why that's important.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the conversations that I've had with many school counselors is that the challenge they have, and administrators too, principals, teachers, is that college is viewed as this destination. Like, you work so hard, you do all these things, and like college is the goal. And then it's like, well, what's next? And I think when you bring in the career exploration to the conversation earlier, as well as the college exploration piece, where you think you might want to go, it's important to make that connection, because you can see that there are multiple paths towards getting to your destination that don't always mean a 4-year degree. And also, you see, like with workforce development piece, that there's this emphasis on skill development and lifelong learning, and that college, again, isn't this like end all be all goal destination, but that it's part of a continuum. And the more we can help young people and families view it as a continuum and as a process, the less emphasis there'll be on like, okay, I have to get into this college or else the sky's going to fall in. Or if I don't go to this one college, I'm not going to be successful in life. And to sort of, in my opinion, it sort of takes the pressure off of this one sole decision that's going to happen. Now, granted, it is a super loaded decision with big implications, but the more pressure we can take off of young people, more pressure we can take off of families, I think, is overall a good thing and helps bring better perspective to the process.
You've been a presenter for many years, and you're someone that cares very deeply. Obviously, we've seen about affordability. That students and families should strongly consider affordability as part of their thought process when they're looking, say at college, for example. Can you tell me what you tell families that whether you're presenting for MIFA or talking to them in another capacity? What do you tell families about that?
Sure, I tell families affordability is huge. A lot of times people equate like college admissions with like, do I have the academic chops or the academic qualifications to apply for the set of schools that I'm most interested in? And am I academically qualified? Do I look on a scattergram, be it Navient, be it anything online that says, okay, your GPA is this, your standardized test scores are this, you have this many honors and advanced placement classes, therefore here are your target schools. And you know, I would recommend the importance of doing that from affordability standard. The thing is, every family has different definitions of what is affordable, and people have different definitions of financial risk. Like, what is an acceptable financial risk? Some people may say, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to borrow $200,000 in loans because I want to make it happen for this one particular school." Or another family will be like, "Yeah, you know what? That seems like a very risky strategy to me. I'd like to go in a different direction." I think it's important not only to have the conversation about what is affordable between the partners, if two partners are paying for a child's college education, but also between the partners and the students themselves so that they have some perspective. Oftentimes in my career, I've seen where a family has come to me in July or August when they get their bill and they're like, what do we do now? And it's like at that point, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place because you've committed yourself to this institution that you now find is no longer affordable. So the earlier those conversations can be had, the better. Um, and again, it's just establishing that perspective. Much like you're looking for an academic fit for a college or a social fit, so too should you look for a financial fit. And for every family, that's going to mean something different. And it's challenging because it's not as clearly defined as the academic fit, right? So you can look at a bunch of colleges and pretty much determine very quickly if you fall within the parameters of what students were, the academic profile of admitted students. It's much harder to determine the financial profile, even with all the tools they have available to calculate like net price and, what am I actually going to pay? I'm not going to really pay sticker price. So if I do pay this as my net price, okay, well, that's what I'm going to pay for this 1 year, but financial aid is a year-to-year proposition. So how do I know what I'm going to get sophomore, junior, and senior year? Oh, by the way, I have two more kids behind the one that's currently going. So again, that's why you have to take the affordability means not just like paying for the current student that's in school, but like any student that's behind them, and then how paying for college impacts your the ability to retire if that is one of the goals you have.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about that's always stayed with me was the perspective on colleges that we have in New England. And this is something that you sort of alluded to a while back when you said that, a focus on college as the destination and the sky's going to fall on it if I don't get this particular college. Particularly in New England, we have so many private colleges and so many prestigious colleges. How does that shape our view of what is affordable and what isn't from the rest of the country?
Sure.
Yeah.
So keep in mind, about 70% of people nationwide go to public colleges. We're the only state in the country where more people go to private colleges than public colleges. So it is a casts a very large shadow over the perception of how folks here in New England, and particularly in Massachusetts, view college. Right? If I say college, and if I'm having a talk with families, immediately people are going to think of a 4 year school with leafy campus and all this, right? Um, so I think part of it is expanding the definition of college for folks in general and understanding that it means a lot more than 4 year school. But then also recognizing here in New England that we can fall victims to just basic behavioral economics, where behavioral economics is something we think something is more valuable because it costs more. And so if a college costs X, wow, it costs really a lot of money, therefore it must be good. And so there's a psychology about it that I think is important, and it gets back to the affordability piece and establishing your own boundaries. Again, with what is affordable, what do I think is a quality, what is a good school, not relying on the conversation among your peers, like the validation you might get from slapping a certain bumper sticker on your car. Like one of my standard lines in my talks, MIFA conversations is where your son or daughter goes to college is not reflection on how well of a job you did as a parent. It's a market condition whether or not you can afford a school, depending on your definition of affordability. And don't get swept up in the business of higher ed. It's important to separate that and make a very cerebral decision. But I think because college is this like loaded investment, and people equate it like, okay, well, it has so much bearing on the rest of my child's life. Like, I think we maybe outsize the proportion of impact that it can have, and therefore, um, the outsized proportion of the impact and how we perceive it impacts our rationality. The level of importance increases, the rationality decreases. So you want to kind of bring those in balance and say, I want to be very level headed and rational about this. And so therefore, here are the schools that we're going to target, or here's how our approach is going to be to this process.
How do you counsel a student or a parent to try to make a wise decision in the face of that emotional pressure that you talked about? If he or she doesn't go to X college.
I have had conversations with folks who have said, well, as a parent, I want to hold up my end of the bargain. I told, little Johnny or little Susie that if they did all these things and they got into this school, that I would find a way to make it happen. And I think if you're a parent that's kind of like made that contract with your child, you need to kind of, I don't say this lightly. I mean, I have a child who's about to go into high school, so I'm not saying this callously, but like rip it up and start all over. I don't know that as a parent you understood the terms of the deal because of how capricious college financing can be, right? Um, I think it's also important to make sure that both, if it's a two-parent household, that both parents are on the same page. I've often ran into some unfortunate situations where one parent's like, okay, full wind to the sails, let's just do whatever we have to do, and the other parent might be a little more fiscally conservative and say, wait a minute, hold on, how does this fit into our larger overall financial goals? And then for the student, if I will have conversations with them either with parents or by themselves, and then just ask, and like, what is it that attracts you to the school? Like, why do you feel this is the right fit? And if they're candid and they say, oh, because my friend's going, or oh, because I think it's great, then you can sort of like peel back sort of the reasoning, and hopefully, if you're still in the evaluation process, get them to look at a broader range of schools rather than pigeonholing in on only name brand institutions.
I want to talk briefly too about another topic that we've discussed previously that I think people would be interested in, and it's about the long-term trends in college cost and in demographic changes that may lead to challenges for colleges in the number of students going to college, and about the impact that might have on college costs in the future.
A lot of colleges are going to be kind of competing with each other for the same pool of students, the same shrinking pool. And so, how do we diversify our portfolios, and how do we, you know, demonstrate our value beyond like the students that are just leaving high school and transitioning, or adult learners? Where let's double down on adult learners, because in fact, if you look at stats, like the average age of a college student isn't the 18 to 21-year-old that we stereotypically see in movies, and the whole rites of passage moving along, but it is those 23, 24, 25 year olds, perhaps have a job, might have families, etc. So I think, again, bringing it back a little bit to the New England piece and the business of higher ed here, I don't know that we'll see a ton of mergers and acquisitions and closures. So I'd like to think that you're going to see a lot more of agreements with the private sector, and especially as we're looking at developing skills and helping people move within organizations and quote unquote upskill. And so, again, I think you look at where schools are making um, agreements with employers on majors. I mean, that's a province of 2-year colleges across the country that are doing these types of things. And so the traditional 4-year liberal arts, like, let's study Chaucer and, deconstruct all, Immanuel Kant, like that's great, and there'll always be a market for that. But I think, higher education for the masses is a little bit more utilitarian. And how is this, on a pathway towards my degree, or like improving my station at work and providing me opportunities to move forward within my career.
So you think that that's something that will, as colleges rethink their sort of relationship to students and to the marketplace, that is going to be something that benefits students in terms of cost?
Well, absolutely. I think it's going to be consumers' choice and people voting with their feet and turning down offers, and it may be turning down brand name schools to go to something that might not be as prestigious or reputable, but can provide a quality experience. One of the things that I tell families a lot is, to help them sort of, um, bring some perspective to the dream school, like I have to go here, and like, this school or bust, is that there are a variety of ways to enhance the college experience that aren't just like plush dorms with air conditioning and, an iPad and, smart fridge in your room. um, so think of all the different ways that you can enhance the experience, through your network, and especially now with social media, the ability to connect with people and ping somebody and say, hey, I got your name from somebody, can we just set up 15 minutes to do a Zoom chat? I have these kinds of questions. Like the ability to sort of informational interview and get experience that way and make connections, is just amazing in a way that when I went to college, and before the internet was invented, like we just didn't have that. My hope is that, people sort of adopt a more of a hybrid mentality towards their education and career preparation in high school and beyond, that again doesn't focus on like, okay, it like put the pot roast in the oven and 4 years later it comes out fully baked, but
Mm.
more, taking more agency, and not just like, well, I'm going to go to college and then I'm going to come out this educated scholar ready to take on the world. Like, no, here are some things that I can do to create agency for myself and like set a path forward, developing skills and connections and things like that.
And is that something that you talk to students about before they get to school?
Well, I think it's important to, I guess I do a little bit of like, level set, like expectations. So, for example, if I talk to kids who want to go to Florida, I'm like, all right, well, are you going to Florida to study aquaculture, or are you going to Florida because you want to party? Because you can go to University of Maine, and study aquaculture, and because there's no, aquaculture equivalent, I'm not sure, and don't quote me on that because I haven't checked the, New England tuition student program. I forget what the technical term of it is, but basically you can pay in-state rates if your school, the New England Regional Tuition Program, I think it stands
Yes, tuition break, right?
tuition break,
The
right?
yeah.
So, you could go to University of Maine and major in the same thing, and I mean, obviously it's not as sunny, but so I think it's level setting and it's also exposure to, similar possibilities. And then it's like, okay, if you think you want to major in X and you're going to have this outcome, all right, well, what if you don't have that outcome? How would you pivot? And then they're like, oh, well, if I didn't do this, then I would study this. I was like, okay, well, so you're not going to this college to do that. Like, keep an open mind. I mean, they say the average student changes their major 7 or 8 times before they settle on something. And I think, obviously for people who say, I want to build bridges, I'm going to be a civil engineer, or, I'm going to be a doctor and I have to get started right away, like pre-med, curriculum, organic chemistry sophomore year, and you're very focused, great. I think for the most part, people go to college and they're really not sure, and that's okay. But, the sooner that they sort of make those connections, and challenge those assumptions, because I tell young people, talk to folks that are already working in the field and find out what their career progression was. Find out what they majored in. You'd be surprised.
Part of the problem that you and I and anybody in this field recognizes is that a lot of the times, by the time students are going to college, or you getting their financial aid offers or making the choices, they're just thinking about things that maybe should have been brought to their attention earlier, right? So, and you mentioned working at an organization now that sort of pivots to the middle school age range. What is Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, what is something that what are some changes that we can make to get kids to be thinking about things like this maybe a little bit earlier? And it's always going to be difficult. I can't imagine, just thinking back to myself in seventh grade or eighth grade or in God knows in high school, um, you know, taking much very seriously at that
Yeah.
age.
Well, yeah,
But yeah,
another way
what
to
can
think
we
about
do?
it. So yeah, it's interesting because the one way to look at it is, and some of the I think, and this gets back to me being a very positive person. I think some of the negative ways that it's framed is that, oh well, a 13 or 14-year-old is not going to know what they want to do, and you don't want them to, you don't want to. There's concerns with tracking and saying like, okay, you're basically telling a student they should be X, and these are all the things you need to be that person. I tend to think about it in a different way and say that, um, you're almost validating their interests and abilities and skills currently now, and they're saying, you like photography, you like art. Wow, look at all the different ways that you can apply your talents to create a living and make a living doing that. Right. So graphic design, there's like every time I watch a movie with my kids, whether it's like an animated movie like Disney or DreamWorks, or whether it's like, like Marvel, the Avengers, and you scroll down, you see all of the people that contributed technical support. I'm like, that could be you on a PC in your home, like, helping out with the digital design of the scene, the creation. Like, it's not just the act. Like, so somebody can say, I want to be in entertainment, and you can say, that's great, you can try to be an actor, but if you're not an actor, here's all the things that happen behind the scenes. I think it's more exposure to all of the possibilities that your interests and skills and talents can take you. And that's a different from saying, okay, if you this career is like a civil engineer, and if you want to be a civil engineer, you need 3 years of this, you need 4 years of that, and blah 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 blah. Like, we're not telling students, pick your path, pick your destiny, and then it will forever be charted. I mean, you look at that with vocational schools. I mean, vocational schools have great opportunities for young people to do a variety of things. And yes, you pick a particular focus, but it doesn't mean it's like that's your future for the next 40 years. I firmly believe in human potential, and that it's on us as well, it's grown-ups, I hate using that word, but like, as professionals that are in this space and invested in young people and the development of their futures, is really helping them expand the idea of what's possible, and validating their interests and skills and talents, and not saying, and not being negative, and not trying to pigeonhole, but more to expand. My son participated in a wonderful basketball camp this year that was like, brought in analytics and talked about, as much as it talked about like, well, here's the science behind why this play works, and using angles and vectors and things like that, but then also like analytics and probability, and like, here's the likelihood of that play working, and here's why, like, this player might be better because they get more rebounds versus somebody who scores more points. And who knows? I don't know. He still has designs on playing in the NBA, but maybe his interest in analytics or his interest in data has been stoked, so that the next time he gets a math assignment, he's like, "Oh, this is useless. Like, when am I after to learn this?" And I say to parents too, please be open to having conversations with your kids about, hear them. They may say, you know what, I'm not really wanting to go to college right now. That doesn't mean they don't won't go forever. They may want to have a conversation about deferring and taking a year off, or like delving more into their interests, so that when they do go, they will be more serious about their studies, they will be more focused, and they will have a more quality experience.
Before we go, I just want to ask you one question. If you are talking to a family who is just starting this process, they're looking at colleges, they're trying to maybe compile their list, or send off their applications, or maybe even file their FAFSAs this year, and they're struggling with the question that they always ask me, which is, how do families do this? Like, how are we supposed to do this? What would you say?
Well, first I tell them to take a deep breath, and it's like, it's looking at the top of Everest and being like, how the heck am I ever going to climb that? Like, really? And I mean, I know it's a tried and true and worn out cliche, but the longest journey begins with a single step. I think it helps to compartmentalize. I always say Manila folders are your friend. So, it's all part of the same process. But as much as you can kind of compartmentalize and say, okay, if we're looking at schools, I usually kind of set parameters and say, is it big or small? And do you want to go close to home or far away from home? And so you have a file of like big schools that are close. You have a file that are big schools that are far. You have a file that are small schools that are close, and a file that are small schools like, and being able to like, because I being able to like break down things into, it's like thinking about it from a math perspective and like a big number, but breaking it down into its lowest common denominator. I've often said that my job, especially when I was in doing more policy focused work, was to be able to articulate and explain complex, you know, uh, policy, procedure, and practice, and make it into digestible portions that just a general person on the street could understand if I explained it to them. And I think that's what it's hard if it's easy for me because like I speak the language, and I've often said that financial aid is a language that you have to learn. Um, but the more fluent you become in the language of financial aid, the language of higher education, the better you will be able to do that, and to break things down into the lowest common denominators, so that you can look at them and attack them from that perspective, versus like trying to wrap your whole arms around it in one sitting, right? And so, yeah, I mean, and set yourself timelines, and don't put unnecessary pressure on yourself. Like recognize that there are deadlines. Don't wait until the day before to do it, and recognize you can do things as a process and move them along, versus like, okay, let's all tackle this in one night.
All right, Kevin. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good luck with everybody, and have a pleasant rest of the year.
Okay, folks, well, that about wraps it up. I want to thank Kevin Fudge one more time for sharing his thoughts with us. And folks, if you liked the show today and you want to hear more from MIFA on all topics related to planning, saving, paying for college, career readiness, and reaching financial goals, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And whether you're a new or regular listener, please remember to rate and review us so we can keep doing what we're doing and getting this show out to people like you. I want to thank our producer, Sean Connolly. Once again, my name is Jonathan Hughes, and this is the MIFA Podcast.